to kick things off, I'd love to hear a bit about some of the quiet moments, maybe some restful moments that we've all had during the summer. If you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, we'd love to hear just a moment where you had um, some time to yourself, maybe something like a moment to just be quiet and still and just to refresh ourselves. Feel free to share in the chat. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Michelle Chung, and I'll be your speaker today. Joining me is Chris, who is our executive assistant, our clinical assistant, who's here helping us out. She's going to be sending things in the chat throughout. These will be some really important resources that can help us and that you can actually keep and use on your own. So Chris, can you just give us a wave?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here.
Awesome. And for those of you who joined us in our first webinar or who follow us on webinar, also on Instagram, there is Dr. Laura, who is also the co-founder of the Modern Asian Parent with Me. And you'll be hearing from her during our next webinar, which will be in the fall, hopefully in September, October. And you'll be hearing from her. She'll be presenting a lot on some actual things that we can think about now that the transition has completed and we're sort of in the school year. How do we start that school year off on a good foot? Awesome. So just wanted to take a look and see what some of our responses are here. I love it. Found a rainy weather in New York really calming. Rainy day reading, sing along with YouTube. I actually love all of those examples. These are really wonderful things and ways to keep ourselves also in a really nice restful state, things that we all need. I myself just came back from a trip from Italy. It was gorgeous. And for those of you who follow us on Instagram, my husband and I were really trying to give you some tips that we found helpful in traveling with kids and keeping them occupied on vacation and while sightseeing. So I know some things that we put up there were like we were teaching some of our kids how to frame photos or whatever staircase we were able to find. We had the kids run up and down every staircase to just let go of some of that energy. So just tune into our Instagram site for certain tips like that that we'll be sharing continually. Okay, so thank you all for sharing some of your experiences there. So in today's webinar, we're going to have a bunch of tips that are hopefully will be really helpful in easing this back to school transition. So we'll cover everything from creating effective routines to fostering positive learning environments, all while balancing expectations and offering emotional support to our children. So now I know the end of summer and the transition to fall is often has a lot of different mixed emotions. Maybe some relief, maybe a bit of stress, but we're all happy and honored that you're here to spend this time with us today. So a few quick housekeeping notes. Let's just keep our microphones muted through the session unless you are asking some questions at the end during our Q&A. We will have a Q&A towards the end. Feel free to keep your cameras on or off, whatever you feel most comfortable with. We'll be sharing resources via the chat throughout the presentation and also at the end of the webinar. So look out for those, and Chris will be dropping those into the chat throughout. Before the webinar ends, we're going to ask for some quick feedback and just a quick survey that we're asking for you to fill out or just give us some quick thoughts. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session, so feel free to send and submit questions throughout the chat. And hopefully we'll be addressing some of those at the end of our presentation today, but also continuing to address them in upcoming webinars and through our Instagram as well. Okay, so let's dive in. So let's start with something I think many of us can really relate to, which is the anxiety our kids might feel as they're heading back to the fall and back to school. So transitions, especially big ones like this, starting the new school year, starting anything new can be really stressful for kids and honestly also for parents. So, kids in particular, they might be anxious about starting new routines, having a new teacher, a different group of classmates. So, some very common back to school challenges that I hear often from the families I work with are things like separation anxiety. Sometimes for kids, it is tough to adjust after a long break of being with their parents or being with their caregivers more often, to all of a sudden separate and to have to go to school and to be apart with them from them for hours. There's also social concerns like making new friends or dealing with peer pressure that can really weigh heavily on our kids' minds. And then there's academic stress, right? So everything from meeting the expectations of themselves or of their parents or their teachers, and having to do homework and tests and quizzes and all of these things that then all of a sudden are added to their pressure. The change in routine is always an adjustment. Waking up earlier, maybe doing more structured activities, then coming home to do homework, being in bed by a certain time. These are all real adjustments that do take time. Then there's so much uncertainty during this time. There's new teachers, whether you're going to like them, new classmates, unknown subjects, a different environment. These are all things that bring lots of uncertainty. And then for some of our kiddos, even some things like bullying or social conflicts, right? These are things that do come up for our kids and can be really challenging. Um, Now, you might be asking, how do we help our kids navigate these challenges and these adjustments? And here are some real practical tools and steps that we can take. One, I like to always recommend to all of the families I work with to create a preschool of like a pre starting school routine. So this means having a gradual adjustment to some of the routines that we will be establishing once school starts, once the fall is in full swing. So you'll see here um, on the screen, we've created a back to school transition planner to help guide you and your family back into these routines slowly. So Chris, do you mind sharing that in the chat with our group? So in this back to school transition planner or plan, what you'll see is open communication, which is really important. These are prompts that you can use to ask your kids and to really get you to think about what are some things that are concerning? What are some things that might be worrying them as they're going through this adjustment? And involving your child to give them a sense of control. Ask them, hey, what could you do to help prepare you in some of these adjustments? What do you want to do to make this experience more positive? As long as you give them a little more control, a sense of input into some of this transition, it actually really helps the kids to feel that they can get through this in an easier, more smooth way. Now, the other thing I will say is practice, practice, practice. The more you practice something, the easier it will just get. So practicing shorter periods of separation, if that's something that you're concerned about or something you know your kid will struggle with, start to practice some of those periods where you're able to leave them with other people, with other caregivers, or at with friends for a while. Practice that separation and create longer periods of separation as you're getting ready for school. Practicing or role playing, dealing with unkind kids. Having your kid be in a scenario and practicing, like, what is that going to be like if these kids say these things to you? What will you say to them in response? or practicing even talking to some new people that might be around you, some safe people. That could be things like your neighbors or maybe a new kid on the playground, just being able to flex some of those muscles and get a little bit more used to these things that they are going to have to deal with once they go back to school. So I wanted to ask you in the audience to just take this moment to talk about what is your top transition concern as we're going into this fall and this school year. And feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat. And I want us to think about that, because these are things that also we can possibly address towards the end in the Q&A, but also just to get a sense of what are some things that are on your mind right now as we are entering this this transitional time. So feel free to do that. Great. So I see some peer pressure is also on people's mind, and how to help our kids address that. Okay, great. So thank you for sharing. Thanks for dropping that in there. I'm going to keep that in mind as we get through the presentation, but also in our Q&A. So these transitional times, they can absolutely be a struggle, not only for our children, but also for us as the parents. So these transition times are a great opportunity to also reset and to establish new routines that can work for the whole family. So certain habits, certain things that we have gotten used to in the summer that we know probably weren't the best, maybe a little bit more screen time than usual, maybe it's a later bedtime than usual. These are things that we can use at this opportunity to just refresh and to be able to start anew. So summer ending, that could definitely bring some mixed emotions. I think for some of us, it might be a sense of relief. For some, it might be sadness. And that's normal to feel that way. I want us to normalize that feeling, because as the summer ends, many parents experience lots of different feelings. What I will say is that I do know that a lot of parents say to me, one of those feelings that they feel is a sense of relief because they want to get back into some routine and to a sense of normalcy again. But there's also this feeling of stress, because as we all know, the month of September is a marathon month for parents. It is so much, there's so much transition and so much stress, and every back to school meeting and different routines and a whole different schedule that we have to adjust to. And then for working parents, that even becomes another stressor, right? The fall brings on more projects, more things that people are focused on. So there's this constant juggle between work, managing kids, activities, and preparing for this new school year ahead. And it really takes a toll on us, both mentally and physically. So if you're feeling this mix of emotions right now, please give a thumbs up in the comments in the chat. Just let us know, hey, this is something that I am experiencing too. So we know that we're all feeling lots of different emotions, which is why it's important to note that we should not forget about ourselves in this process. So as parents and caregivers, it's easy to feel burnt out, especially after a busy summer. We're entertaining our children, like making sure that they're having fun, and we're relaxing and having the best that we can out of our summer too. And so burnout can really show up in exhaustion, irritability, even a sense of detachment. And so self-care is so extremely important here. It's not selfish, it's necessary. I always say, I love this saying that you cannot pour from an empty cup, because you can't. If there's nothing to pour and nothing to give to other people, there's no way that it's going to work out. So whether it's a short walk or some deep breathing exercises or just a few quiet moments with a cup of coffee or a tea, taking time for yourself is absolutely crucial. So it's important to find, I think in addition to that, and I will share in a second some of my um, favorite tips to figure out how to do that. But it's also important to find like-minded parents and friends that you can really commiserate with and find a sense of community because you are not alone. And this connection that you might have to other people, that and knowing that you're not alone in this and going through this together is what really can carry us through these really difficult moments. And within your household and your family, don't be afraid to reach out or connect with your partner or other parents who really might understand and likely do understand what you're going through, because it takes a village and it truly does. Another way to manage burnout is to delegate and to split responsibilities. Give your children some chores or things that they can actually take charge of and take that sense of responsibility because they can contribute to the family and make sure that it runs smoothly more than you might realize. So, for example, even something like, hey, can you just help me rinse the dishes or put some of these um, you know, plastic containers away for the younger kids, or for the older kids, have them do the dishes, have them take out the garbage, because we are all contributing members of this family unit and we all need to do our part to make sure it runs. And to be honest, being able to teach our children these types of responsibilities and chores is actually doing wonders for them in terms of their development and their growth. And just keep in mind that it's okay not to have everything under control. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, right? And perfect parents, they don't exist. Our children are not expecting us to be perfect either. And so, just being able to give ourselves that sense of compassion and and giving us a little bit of a break so that we're able to have that wiggle room and we're able to say, hey, it's okay if we're not going to get it right, especially during this time of transition. There's a lot on your plate. You are doing the best that you can. And our children, all they expect from us is to be present, right? So give yourself that grace and set more achievable goals, right? Perfect is not a goal that we're going to achieve. So, with all that being said, if you're like me, I don't have time to just sit in a bathtub for 2 hours or to go away for a weekend and to completely unplug. So, what's a really important parenting hack is to get the most out of the moments that we do have. Um, I always think of this is a weird analogy, but this is the way my brain works. I always think of it as it's almost like when I eat a grapefruit. I eat all the pulp and everything that I can, and then I squeeze, the juice, right, to get the last drops of juice. And then I'm not going to just squeeze it once. Then I'm going to fold it the opposite way, and then I'm going to squeeze it again to get that very, very last drop of grapefruit juice that I can get. And that's exactly what we need to do with these small moments that we have. We need to squeeze all the positivity, all the gratitude that we can feel in those small moments. And what that means is that we need to stop multitasking. And this is so hard for so many of us, but staying fully present and mindful, even if it's for a few minutes, is really how we squeeze all that juice out of that grapefruit. So, for example, when I go for a walk and get my cup of coffee, or my lunch or whatever it might be, I like to listen to the sounds around me. I'm not thinking about my email or what I'm what I'm going to be making for dinner that day. I'm just focusing on listening to the sounds around me. Or sometimes if it's a sunny day, it's about just noticing how the sun feels on my skin in that moment. And that is all I'm doing as I'm walking. And you just need to soak it all in, right? In that small moment. Because again, sometimes that's all we have, right? So finding those ways to get the most out of our moments is really the best parenting hack that I can give you to squeeze in some of that self-care. And when you do go to that exercise class or to the gym or for that run, or if you just spend a little bit more time in the bathroom than you normally would, you know, give yourself that moment and don't make those moments guilt-free, right? Don't feel guilty for doing that. Just allow yourself to do it and to say, hey, I deserve this small moment of self-care. Okay, and so speaking about moments, I'm sure that we've all felt the feeling of not having enough moments in our day to get things done, right? So one way to mitigate some of those feelings is to rely on routines. So these consistent routines, they're incredibly important not only for ourselves as caregivers, so we can know what to expect and how to manage our time, but also for our children to help them feel secure and organized, right? Just like parents, children also feel more organized and more together when they know there's a routine and something to follow. So, Chris, do you mind just sharing in our chat the daily routine worksheet? This is just an example. It doesn't have to be exactly what you follow, but this is something that has worked for a lot of the families that I work with. That just a quick glance of what you do, right? It's three main parts. There's the morning routine, which is always hectic. There's the after school or the homework routines. And then there's the bedtime routines. And these are things that, no matter how you map out your routines, are the most important components of what you have. So the morning routines, these are just some few things that I want you to think about. Morning routines, I like to start off the day um, in a structured way, but let's start it off with something fun or lighthearted. So it might look like something like a morning dance to the bathroom or a favorite wake up song that you like to listen to, or listening to music maybe while you're making breakfast. Just start it off in the most upbeat way as possible. And if you're like me, I'll be honest, I'm not a morning person. So anything that can help me get through my morning is always, I feel really grateful for, and it just helps that little bit. So something like after school routines or homework times. You want to set for homework, you want to set a dedicated distraction free area and maybe a time and a space that your kids will be able to do their homework and to focus on it. It might be like a dedicated time for just snacks, or maybe just dedicated, 15 minutes where your kid can just do nothing and just decompress when they come home. These are all things that are, I think, really helpful during that afternoon time. And then for the bedtime routine, this is something that should obviously be calming and something that is a real key to helping our kids transition to that sort of, really calm, quiet, and slow time in their evening time. So I like to think of it almost like a classical conditioning. So if you go back to your intro to psychology, Pavlov's dogs story, right? There's something that you keep doing over and over again in the same way, and after time, your brain is trained to think like, oh, when this starts to happen, it means this is going to happen. So I like to train our brains like that for bedtime. So you want to set, um, you know, a routine that's going to be the same so that when your brain says, and knows, oh, this is what's happening. It knows this is the time to calm down. This is the time that we are going to get ready for sleep. And so that could be something like, for some people, it's a song that they sing with their kids every night. It could just even be something like a saying that they say, the same exact thing every single night. Or for people who are religious, I know a lot of people like to do prayers ending at the end of every night. And so this is again a set thing that happens consistently. So your brain knows time to shut off. An important thing also is to set a moment at least to just think about the next day, right? And plan. You want to pack your bag, make sure that you picked out your clothes for the next day. And, what do you have after school the next day to make sure you're packing and preparing for that. So just as an example of all of this, I know for my son, he likes to he has a very set routine at the end of the day. And my last thing, he knows as soon as I say this, I'm leaving and it's time for him to go to sleep. I say to him every night, you don't need to be perfect, but you are the perfect son for me. And then that's kind of like his cue, and it makes him, leave him with some warm, fuzzy feelings, leave me with some warm, fuzzy feelings. And then, we separate and it's good night. Another thing to kind of think about for setting routines and to help with the transition to create these routines and habits is I am all for a rewards tracker. I know some people will say, they don't like the idea of rewards. It doesn't have to be something so materialistic per se. It could just be a check mark. Hey, let's see how many check marks we can get in a row for us being able to stick to this routine. Reinforcing things that are not quite a habit or don't come so easily for your child is really not a bad thing, because it keeps them consistent, and there's a sense of accountability, right? Not only for your child, but also for you as the parent. So remembering that a rewards chart, although it can be helpful, is not something that will be there forever, right? It's just a way to start things off correctly and to get the motivation going to get a habit started. Because I'll be honest with you, I think almost every family that I have worked with, and myself included in this, the rewards charts are really hard to maintain over a long period of time, but they are great to get things kickstarted. It's a really fast way to get things going. Okay. And at the end of the day, we just really want to make sure to involve our child in creating their schedules, because if you get their input, it's more likely that they'll buy into it, and then because of that, they'll really stick with it, and they'll be easy. There's not much of a fight that you have to put into it. So as I kind of walk away from this, just remembering consistency is crucial. Visual aids like charts, they can be really helpful, and just use those reward charts. They're not a bad thing to do. So I know one of the things that has helped my family in all of this is also like a visual checklist at the back of the door before the kid goes off to school. It's kind of like, do you have your backpack? Do you have your water bottle? Do you have your after school activities? It's like a quick bam, 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 a way for him to look at it, and then he can leave out the door to the bus. And that's something that really helps. The other thing I tend to help that I find that helps in setting up these routines is to create alarms. Like, so for example, there is an alarm that goes off for my son to tell him, hey, it's time to start your bedtime routine, right? So whatever he was doing, he needs to stop it, and it's time to go brush his teeth and get shower, change into his pajamas. And that way I don't have to be the one to tell him because kids don't like that, right? After a while. And so it's just like, okay, that alarm goes off. It's time to go do that thing. Okay. Let's talk about academic stress and setting them up for success and resilience to this academic stress. So it's no secret that the demands of school can be overwhelming for kids. And honestly, quite frankly, for those of us who have kids who have homework can be really stressful for us too. There are high expectations, whether from parents or from teachers, or maybe even they place on themselves. Some programs, there's a heavy workload, there's multiple assignments, different tests, and that can feel really daunting. Some kids have test anxiety or performance anxiety, or maybe even social stress as they're entering this environment. And then there's the competition with their peers, trying to keep up with each other, trying to keep up with that constant point of comparison can be really exhausting. So how does the stress impact our kids? It impacts them emotionally. They can really feel increased levels of anxiety or lower self-esteem. It can affect them cognitively. It can affect their ability to concentrate and to learn. And physically, some kids, even the stress manifests in things like sleep problems or headaches or migraines. I do have a lot of families and clients who have kids or parents who have migraines when they get really stressed out. Behaviorally, it affects them by creating avoidance of tasks, maybe procrastination. Some kids even get to school refusal. They don't want to go to school anymore. And socially, it leads to avoidance of social activities, sometimes withdrawal from friends and from family, and a lot of isolation. But there are ways that we as parents can help support them and to help build resilience to these types of stressors. So one thing that I like to really stress, and I think encourage families to do, is to goal set. Now, goal setting is an art form because you want to set goals that are going to lead to success, right? And something that I like to use as a guide is something called SMART goals. And you can see it up on our presentation right now. This is a way to help your child set realistic goals. And these are, it's an acronym or ways to break it down to make sure, hey, we're setting goals that are achievable, that make sense, that are measurable, that are specific, and that are relevant. This actually kind of matters, and so you're motivated to do it. And time bound, which means there's you're not going to be working on this goal forever. This is something that we want to achieve by a certain amount of time. So for example, like my child said to me, I want to be better at math Olympiad. I don't know if this is something that you're familiar with, but so we sat down and we said, okay, let's do a SMART goal around this. So what's the specific goal? He wanted to be able to get 2 to 3 questions right. Is it measurable? Yes. They have weekly competitions, and there are ways that they can measure this. Is it achievable? Yeah, I actually think he can get 2 to 3 questions. Correct. Is it relevant? Sure. This starting this fall, the competitions start, and it's current. It's something that he's motivated to do, and it's time bound. So we can say by winter, we want to be able to achieve this goal. So that's just an example of how the SMART goals work. So more great tools to support our children academically and be able to balance their emotional health too can involve things like, hey, let's look at their study habits. I cannot tell you how many, this is something that kills me, how many kids that I work with that don't have planners or calendars. I don't know how they can manage anything without a planner or a calendar. And for the younger kids, maybe I feel like planners, calendars, they kind of come more into play like fifth grade to middle school. But for the younger kids, it could be even as simple as being able to put a visual calendar of like, what are your after school activities? Like, what do you do on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? And being able to just help them manage that and see that. It really teaches them to time manage a little bit more and to estimate, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what I can predict. So teaching them to also, for the older kids, limit phone use while you're studying. Like I know so many kids use phones because they need to chat about certain things or ask questions with their peers and other friends. But we need to really limit that and to effectively use breaks during these study times and the study habits. And I think it's okay for parents to just at least check in and be like, hey, how are you studying for that test? What are you doing? Oh, this is a good example. I had a kid who was taking notes and no one knew how they were taking notes until we actually took a look at what they were doing. And oh my goodness, the excruciating amount of time that this student was using to color code things was out of this world. I mean, it was beautiful and it was like a piece of art, but really, I mean, it was taking up way too much time. It was almost too much time taking notes instead of actually being able to paraphrase and do it. So I think as a parent, you want to just check in and see once in a while, like, hey, what does that look like? Right? Positive reinforcement, use it, right? Kids should be encouraged and rewarded and motivated when they do hard work, when they do hard things. And it's okay to do that because it builds confidence. It helps motivate them. It says like, hey, you deserve this. Now, I know some parents say to me, again, I don't love this idea. And they usually will cite this study that shows that if you use a reinforcer, for something that they're already doing well, that it kills the intrinsic motivation. But this study is misunderstood all the time because this study was done with things that people are already motivated to do. So if they're already motivated to do this, and then you add an external motivator or an external reinforcement, then the intrinsic motivation, the internal drive does go down. But you know what? That's not true of things that people are not internally motivated to do already, right? So if these are things that are kind of hard for them to do or things that they don't really want them to do, this external motivator, this positive reinforcement actually really helps. I also ask parents, hey, think about a growth mindset thinking. And so for those of and that type of approach to doing work and to making mistakes. So for those of you who keyed into our first webinar, I did a whole section on growth mindset. And this is something that is so important. And it's so, I can't stress this enough because this is a huge component to building resilience and motivation in our children and even in ourselves. And really what that's about is like, hey, mistakes are a part of the process. We have to make mistakes in order to learn and to get better. And so to take away that shame and that guilt and that need for perfection and to be able to embrace mistakes and to say, hey, that's a part of learning. Focusing on our well-rounded children and their strengths. So not just on academics, let's look at the fact that, hey, maybe they're really good at music. Maybe they have really amazing people skills. It's just not about academics. And sometimes that's just what your children need in order for them to actually do better in other areas of their life, but also even in academics. Sometimes they just need less of that pressure and to be able to say like, hey, there are other things that you're really wonderful at. So establishing consistency, these types of routines, these types of mindsets, These are all things that are really important for our children to be successful, even academically, but in so many of the other things that they do. I also promote parents to teach and to do certain relaxation things, whether it's mindfulness, certain techniques, model them for for your children, teach them to your children, because if you're not, usually other people won't be able to do that. So now let's dive into a topic that I believe many of us can relate to: managing expectations as parents. So as parents, we often carry the weight of various expectations, right? Whether it's societal expectation, cultural expectations, maybe expectations that our families, our bigger families have for our children, or self-imposed expectations. We want the best for our children, right? And for our families. And sometimes that means setting high expectations for them and for ourselves as parents. But what happens when those expectations become overwhelming? Because sometimes they can feel very heavy. So let's take a moment to think about how those expectations can impact both us and our children. When we set high expectations, it can sometimes lead to stress, anxiety, frustration, and conflicts, even within our parent and child relationships. So children might feel a lot of pressure to meet those standards. And if they fall short, it affects their self-esteem, it makes them feel shame, and it can feel really overwhelming. On the other hand, we as parents, we feel immense amounts of guilt, maybe disappointment when our children don't meet those expectations, right? We're questioning, God, did I do enough? What should I have done differently? Can I do more? And it creates this cycle that's just really not benefiting anyone. So I like to shift our perspective to setting, again, realistic and flexible goals that consider our children's unique strengths, right? And maybe what are their challenges? And we want to be able to set expectations that make sense so that we don't feel that level of disappointment and that our kids don't either. So our one approach is to really focus on progress rather than perfection, right? And to ask yourself, what are the small steps my child can take today that I can celebrate their efforts rather than just the outcomes or the achievements or the end results? So by doing this, we're not lowering our expectations, we're actually more aligning them with our child's individual pace and their needs, right? What makes sense for a child? What makes sense to expect of them? This doesn't mean that you shouldn't have high hopes or expectations for your child, but it does mean having adaptable, flexible, and supportive expectations as they grow. And as you're learning more about them and their strengths, and learning as they're learning more about what they like and what they don't like. So sometimes I always say things like, I'm like, for example, I'm 5'2". Like, I'm not, in terms of my height, I'm vertically challenged, right? I'm not expecting that my child is going to be 6'2". Who knows? Maybe he could surprise me, but I'm not setting my goals for him to be in the NBA, right? I was really strong at social sciences. My husband also was an English major, very strong in social sciences. There is, again, I'm always open and flexible to him, my child surprising us, but he might not be, the next nuclear physicist, right? Who knows? But again, just setting sort of realistic expectations and being able to know, like, hey, he's not, that might not be his forte right now, and that's okay, because we're going to focus on those strengths. So academic success, of course, really important, but it shouldn't come at the cost, right, of our child's mental health and their emotional health. So we want to really prioritize other things, right? So things like emotional development, a sense of self-worth, their friendships, And I just want to stress here to remember that self-esteem and self-worth, they're two different things, right? Self-esteem is something that you feel when you accomplish things, when you're good at things, when you feel success. Self-worth, that is just something that you know and you feel because you are a worthy, wonderful human being. And so those are two different things. Self-worth is not something that you achieve. Self-worth is something that you are just born with. Okay, so remembering that our ultimate goal here is to raise well-rounded individuals that feel confident, supported, capable, resilient, whether they're excelling in school or simply learning how to be a good friend, right? So how do we manage our expectations in a healthy way? So a few main key points here. Practicing self-compassion for ourselves, but also for our kids, acknowledging that parenting is hard, right? There's no perfect manual, there's no perfect parent, just being able to have compassion for ourselves. We want to seek support when we need it, whether that's professional support or the support of our village and our community around us. Focus on the big picture, right? Instead of getting caught up on day-to-day challenges, try to remember the long-term big picture goal in mind. We want to be able to have a happy, resilient, a healthy child and developing at their own pace. We want to watch out for moments that we are parenting from anxiety or fear, because sometimes it's easy to find ourselves saying, oh my goodness, if my child is doing this now, it means that they will be like this in the end. And that's not always true. So just watch out for that. Keep referring to your family and parenting values. Keep going back to that because that's really your compass in life. And remember, your child has strengths, your child has weaknesses. Foster those strengths because focusing on that will actually make things easier for them, but also easier for you and easier for them to find success. And just keep in mind that there are different ways to get there, right? There are different ways to achieve success, different paths and different forms that might take. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about creating a positive learning environment at home because this is something that takes some time to develop, and so we might as well start now, right? So this quote is one of my favorites. The more that you read, the more things you will know, the more that you learn, and the more places that you'll go. So this is so true on so many levels because it's emphasizing the point that we can develop a nourishment, a love of learning in our children, and that love of learning will take them further than anything else that we could imagine for them. So one thing that plays a big factor is the space, right? The environment that you create at home and the attitude towards school. I wouldn't say like in the most ideal sense, you want to say like, yeah, my kid loves school, but most people don't love school, right? So it's really about setting up a love of learning or a curiosity of things that can really be the seed that will grow the bigger factors, right? So that could start with, let's start with some concrete things, right? I always like nuggets that you can take home with you. Set up a well-organized, quiet environment, a place for them to study, right? A place for them to read, a place for them to foster some of that curiosity. So make sure it's away from distractions. Maybe not in the, I know a lot of people like to use the dining room. Sometimes that can be very distracting because it's a place of high traffic, right? People kind of going in and out, a lot of people coming and going. So just kind of thinking about that and having your child put some input in that, right? Even having family discussions and environments and conversations around, hey, what do you think about that? Fostering that curiosity, having a lot of open-ended questions and conversations, not really being judgmental or saying that things are right and wrong per se, but just kind of saying like, what do you think? Let's hear. I want to hear what you have to say. I love reading together. That's always like a huge thing. And really exploring different hobbies, interests that are really outside of school and that academic environment. Um, for younger kids, if you have younger kids, hey, let's do play. Play is huge. That's the way they explore concepts, learn problem solving. They learn to interact and to figure out communication skills, develop um, uh, like social skills. This is so important for the younger kids, and for the older kids, really being able to focus on their friendships, because that is the way that they learn to navigate really complex things. They also learn problem solving there, learning how to manage stress, learning how to manage conversations. That's so important. um, and I will say that, although it's difficult to manage all of these things, that it is really important to build some of this foster environments outside of that academic environment, outside of school, having friendships in different types of area. And I know something I always get asked about is technology. So that's something we are going to talk about a little bit more. I think we'll be talking about that more. Actually, Dr. Laura will be talking about that more in the fall in our next webinar. But the one thing that I just want to kind of put out there is, as we're going into this transition, it is of the fall, it is a wonderful time to reset rules and boundaries around technology and screens. So letting the kids know, hey, these are the days you can use your screens, and this is how I expect these screens to be used. It's a wonderful time to reset those rules. Okay, and finally, we're going to just go into a little bit about addressing emotional support, which is a crucial thing for our kids as we're going through this transition. We want to be able to look for signs of distress and things that we need to do for our kids, right? So this can look, these times of distress can look and show up as sleep disturbances, physical symptoms like headaches, stomach aches are a huge thing. And we want to be able to encourage our kids to be open about that, right? Ask them about what's bothering them, what makes them feel, and what makes them feel supported. How do you want me to support you? Look out for things like irritability, withdrawing into their room more than often, maybe withdrawing from their friends. These stomach aches, these headaches are big things that can, ways in which stress and distress can manifest in our kids. And I just want parents to know, hey, sometimes depression looks different in kids. A lot of parents will say, well, they look like they're having so much fun with their friends. They're when they're on their phones and when they're with their friends, they look fine. That's actually sometimes how childhood depression can manifest. They can look fine with their friends, but then when they come home, they're withdrawn, they're irritable, they're not talking sometimes. And yes, some of that is developmental, and that's just normal teenage angst, but sometimes that can be a sign of childhood depression. So what can we do? I want us as parents to be active listeners. We need to validate their feelings. A simple tell me more about that can go miles. We need to be non-judgmental in our language and our stance, because if we are, then our kids won't be open with us. So saying something like, oh, I can see that, or that makes sense. Again, those two, just this blanket statement like that can go miles. Practicing mindfulness, deep breathing, relaxation as a family can sometimes be great, or modeling that for your kids. And then the last thing that I will say is so important is family-friendly activities, engaging on ways to promote bonding, right? Fun, and just being able to connect with one another is so important. And remember that sometimes professional help might be necessary, so don't hesitate to seek that additional support when you need it. Okay, so before we jump into the Q&A, I want us to let us know in our chat, or to use some of this time in the chat, what you want to hear more about in future webinars. Or is there something that you heard about in today's webinar that you felt I just need a little bit more about? Feel free to put that in the chat now. And it's something that we will definitely continue to keep in mind. And then if you could Chris is going to just quickly put the feedback survey and some information in the chat. If you could quickly just take a moment to give us some feedback about our webinar today and what we did, that would be wonderful. Oh, I like that. Somebody just said healthy cultural identity development. I've actually done a few webinars on that, just on that topic, and it is such an important one. And something, actually, I love that. Chris, if we can do that. I think maybe we'll do that in the fall too. I can do a whole series of webinars on that one because there's so many good important pieces there. I love that. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else can? Bicultural, biracial children, absolutely. That's another one. That is a super important topic. Okay, so I'm just going to take a few seconds now. If you have any other questions, anything that you want to add, please do that in the chat. As the questions are coming in, I just want to address some questions that we got prior to the webinar that I think were really thoughtful and great questions. One question that we got was advice on and worries about picky eating and how that can affect kids and not eating anything in school. And that is something that a lot of parents definitely struggle with, including myself. I actually have a picky eater and a kid who actually doesn't do well with hunger cues. So in school, I remember he actually, the teachers even commented that they would notice that towards the end of the day, my son would just put his head on the desk and just kind of gas out, right? This is something that is obviously concerning because kids, they don't have the stamina if they don't have the fuel. Something that I have done and I've really encouraged some of my parents to do is to talk to the school. And like, for example, my school they allowed me to send my son in with a protein shake that I knew he would eat. And he could have that for lunch or during a snack. Or sometimes I know some schools with other clients who have picky eaters were able to bring in certain snacks that they knew their kids would eat, and their kid would be allowed to have that snack during the day. So asking for certain exceptions. But the other thing that you can do, which is not it's more of a long-term solution to this, is to at home to really you slowly want to stretch their palates, right, and their ability to eat. So nutritionists actually say that it takes your taste buds about 7 to 8 times of tasting a new food in order to get actually used to the taste. So if you think about 7 to 8 times, like say, for example, a kid who hates broccoli, they will have to try broccoli 7 to 8 times before their taste bud actually starts to acquire it. And so that is something to think about. You know, whatever you can do at home to really expand that palate, try that. You know, and there is actually a type of therapy that kids can and parents can do to slowly expand their palates. And if that's something that you are in particular interested in, you can email us and I can give you some more information on that. But that is something that is available and that does help these picky eaters. I know there was a question on peer pressure which I thought was a really important topic to address. And again, this is probably something that I could do a whole entire webinar on as well. But it's something that is, I think, really important, right? To be able to deal with peer pressure and to help our kids, you know, I almost say there's like almost like a vaccination process that we need to have when it comes to peer pressure, because the more that you vaccinate them to it, the better and more resilient they'll be to not giving into it, right? The ways that we can do this as from a parenting point of view is to really be able to say, hey, this is something that um I, if you were in our first webinar, we gave out a whole thing about family values. I like to do this with our, especially the slightly older kids or their tweens to teenage years. I like to do that exercise with them too, because it's a way to identify and to say, hey, these are my values, my own personal values. These are the things that are actually important to me. And to be able to have them identify that and to be grounded in that is really important, because in those moments where they're feeling that peer pressure, that is something that they can be reminded of, right? Another thing that I like to inoculate them in terms of for peer pressure is the more confident that they feel in their own self and their own worth, the better that they will be in these moments to be able to stand up for themselves. And that is so important because, building that sense of self, that self-esteem and that self-worth, and using all those techniques that we talked about is a long-term solution to be able to stand up to that peer pressure. Because if they are feeling confident, they can say, I don't care if everyone else is drinking because I don't like the way it tastes, or I think it's stupid, or I don't want to get in trouble, right? And they would be able to stand against that peer pressure because they have that sense of self and sense of worth, that it's okay if these people don't like me for this because I have other ways that I am valuable or a good friend to them or whatever it might be. And the other way that we can do that as a parent is to validate their feelings, because the more you're able to give a sense of weight to a child's feelings, the more they're able to do that for themselves. So that when they're in a situation where they feel uncomfortable and they're feeling peer pressure to do something, if that feeling comes up of, oh, this kind of feels weird to me, if they are used to their feelings being validated, then they themselves can validate it in that moment. And they can say, hey, this feels uncomfortable and that's okay. And so I'm not going to give into it. I'm going to heed my feelings of discomfort and listen to that more than everything else. Again, just some like quick nuggets for you to take home. I see another question that came in is, my kiddo is starting pre-K this year, struggling with refusal going to school every morning. Sure, this is actually a big one. We use a lot of positive reinforcement, which is great, positivity and finding things to look forward to, but 5 days of school is so out of our routine that it's a struggle. Okay, you know what, I've been there. Like, I have so many other parents who have been there too. It looks like you're doing some really great things, like the positive reinforcement and then the positivity and looking for things to look forward to. Something that I might encourage you to do with your kiddo is finding a buddy for them and trying to create some sort of relationship with that kid outside of school. So finding sort of like a safe friend that your child could feel more comfortable being around and being connected to, I actually think is could be really helpful here. And I think the other thing that you can try and do is you're trying to kind of get to the root of the problem, right? Is your child struggling with separation? right? Is it about being away from you? And maybe it just feels too long to be away from you for that long. If that's the case, then you want to work on separation, right? And building that tolerance of separation. If it's some kids, they feel really overstimulated by school, especially in the beginning during the pre-K stages. If it's about that overstimulation, hey, maybe it's like time to talk to the teacher, right? And see how can we accommodate that a little bit more? How can we help him you know get through those moments where it feels really hard and a little bit overwhelming. And so, I mean, those are just kind of two examples, but really kind of trying to get to the heart of the matter. And you might be able to do that with the teacher, and trying to problem solve and brainstorm what's getting in the way of your child feeling a sense of success in preschool right now. But I have to say, I know the safe friend is something that really has helped a lot of kids in that preschool situation. And then the other thing I want to say, just as just to remind you as the parent, is that there is no kid who can't go to school 5 days a week and can't separate from their parent, right? This is something that is a transitional phase for your child. And so remember, I was telling you that as parents, we sometimes have these thoughts like, if they can't do this now, then that means in the future they will be this type of kid, or this will happen to them. So just to kind of be able to take that step back and remind yourself, like, okay, this is a transition. This is something that your kid is learning to overcome, and this will not be forever, right? This is their hurdle right now. And just to be able to give yourself that patience and that grace for yourself and for your child, and to not feel that anxiety around like, why can't they do this? Everyone else seems to be able to do this. And just kind of, do it in that way. But I know it's hard. Especially those mornings and those moments, I know it's probably pretty difficult. I will say the other thing is, sometimes parents find out that one parent or a caregiver is a little bit easier to separate from than the other. So sometimes I will say, play around with that too. Like, for example, if the kid has a harder time going with you, like maybe try it with your partner, or if there's a grandparent or a nanny or whomever it might be, sometimes playing around with that can also help in terms of the separation, the drop off. Okay. So I love the suggestion. I saw that somebody said that another vaccination to try for peer pressure is not to compare, trying very hard not to compare siblings or peers. That's like comparison. Oh God, comparison is another whole topic we could get into as well. It's funny, I was just having this conversation with another one of my clients today. We were talking about how comparison is truly the thief of joy, and how the old adage of the grass is always greener is so true. And so really, the thing that I will say about that is, I think there is an inner dialogue that happens with so many of us, and it's a constant battle of trying to stop ourselves from these points of comparison, or these down the road of comparison. And it's really being able to say to yourself, like, hey, I am going to, like, I am comparing right now, and I know I don't like it when somebody does that to me, so I'm going to stop it. Like this, my child is going on their own pace, or they have other strengths that that I can hold on to. It's really being able to stop yourself. And I have to say, comparison is probably one of the best ways to build confidence. I mean, not comparing your child to to others is the best way to build self-confidence in your child, because then your child learns that they don't have to always, be keeping up with other people. Um, and then they build that ability to feel good about themselves innately. Um, okay, wonderful. I know we went a little bit over time. Thank you so much for your extra time there and attention. I'm so glad that everyone made it here, and the questions and the thoughtfulness is really wonderful. Look out for, like I said, the healthy identity, ethnic identity development, the biracial topics. I think we will for sure be bringing that up and doing some webinars on that. And then there will also definitely be some topics around technology and being able to balance that within our families that are coming up as well. So look for that. And if you have any more thoughts or questions that you would want us to expand on, please let us know, because we're always looking for that type of feedback and input. I hope everyone has a smooth and wonderful transition to back to school time, and we will see you in fall for our next webinar. Hope you have a wonderful night.